Welcome back to History Love. This video is about the election of 1860. This marked the first time that a Republican was elected president. It was also the first presidential election in which both major party candidates were registered in the same home state. Alright, folks, gather round. It's time to talk about the election of 1860, when America went into full "who's going to lead this circus" mode. The United States presidential election of 1860, a dramatic political soap opera filled with debates, disagreements, and the unexpected twist of a Republican winning the White House. On November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln, the tall, bearded guy you might have seen on your $5 bill, managed to defeat not one, not two, but three contenders: Southern Democrat John C. Breckinridge, Democrat Stephen A. Douglas, and Constitutional Union candidate John Bell. Talk about a crowded field. But let's back up and understand why this election was like the political equivalent of a bad breakup. You see, the country was already splitting in two. The North was in the "let's end slavery" camp, and the South was in the "let's keep things as they are" camp. Spoiler: neither side was backing down. The tension over slavery was so high that after Lincoln won, before he even took office in March 1861, 7 Southern states decided to pack their bags and leave. South Carolina kicked things off on December 20, 1860, and with that, the stage was set for the American Civil War. Cue dramatic music. Let's talk conventions, shall we? Now, about those conventions. The Democratic Party had its own dramatic moment in 1860. After the Supreme Court made a huge splash with the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which basically told everyone, hey, slavery's cool in all U.S. territories, things got a little uncomfortable. The election of 1860 was shaping up to be the ultimate showdown between those in the North who were all about abolishing slavery and those in the South who were, well, not exactly fans of that idea. The Democratic Convention began in Charleston, South Carolina, in April to May 1860, and oh boy, did it get heated. The issue of slavery split the party right down the middle, with Southern delegates storming off in a huff. Meanwhile, Northern Democrats couldn't quite decide on a candidate. Senator Stephen A. Douglas was the front-runner, but he couldn't quite manage to gather enough votes to win the nomination. So, the Democrats packed up and headed to Baltimore in June to try again. The result? They finally nominated Douglas, though many Southern delegates had already thrown in the towel. And then, the plot thickened. In a true "let's make this more interesting" moment, Southern Democrats went rogue and nominated John C. Breckinridge for president. He had the support of those who wanted to keep slavery and was ready to take the stage with his running mate, Senator Joseph Lane. This meant that, in the eyes of the country, there were two official Democratic candidates. Oh, the drama. The Republican Convention. Enter Lincoln, stage right. While the Democratic Party was busy splintering into two factions, the Republicans were ready to show up and make history. The Republican Convention was held in Chicago from May 16 to 18, 1860, and this party, still in its infancy, having just formed in the 1850s, was pretty clear about its stance: no more slavery expansion into U.S. territories. While some members were all about abolishing slavery altogether, the party didn't go as far as to call for the immediate freedom of slaves in the states that already had them. They had to be a little pragmatic after all. At the start of the convention, the favorite to be the party's nominee was Sen. William H. Seward from New York. He was the clear frontrunner, but Abraham Lincoln, who had lost to Stephen A. Douglas in the 1858 Illinois Senate race, wasn't far behind. On the first ballot, Seward took the lead, but as the second ballot rolled around, Lincoln began to narrow the gap, and by the third ballot, surprise, Abraham Lincoln was the man of the hour. The crowd went wild, or at least, they would have, if they had Twitter. Senator Hannibal Hamlin of Maine was tapped as Lincoln's running mate, completing the ticket. The Constitutional Union Party. The "let's ignore slavery" party. Meanwhile, there was a little party on the side that tried to take a different approach. The Constitutional Union Party, formed in 1859, was like the Switzerland of U.S. politics. It didn't want to take sides on slavery. Made up of former Whigs and members of the Know Nothing Party, the Constitutional Unionists were focused on fealty to the Constitution. Slavery? Meh. Let's not talk about it. They nominated former Senators John Bell from Tennessee and Edward Everett from Massachusetts. Their slogan? Let's keep the Constitution intact, ignore the burning issue of slavery, and hope for the best. The party was especially popular in the border states, where folks were maybe too eager to avoid the debate. The campaign. Let's get this show on the road. Once Lincoln snagged the nomination, he did something very unusual for a politician. He stayed home. No grand speeches, no crowds of cheering fans. Instead, Lincoln took the quiet route, directing his campaign with a steady hand from behind the scenes. His primary goal? Keep the Republicans united and avoid any major internal disagreements. Lincoln even advised party workers to not speak up about any issues that could cause a rift. "Let's just get through this without any drama," he probably said. Meanwhile, Breckinridge, the Southern Democrat, didn't do much campaigning either, delivering just one speech. What a showman! Now, Senator Stephen A. Douglas, on the other hand, was out there everywhere, traveling both the North and South, preaching the Union gospel and vehemently opposing secession. But, let's be real, while the candidates were doing their campaigning, most of the real action was happening at parades and rallies. Who doesn't love a good rally, right? It's like political cheerleading, and it worked. On election day, about 4/5 of eligible voters showed up. They were ready to make some noise. Election day. A sectional smackdown. The election of 1860 wasn't a national race in the traditional sense. It was more like a game of regional domination. In the North, it was all about Lincoln and Douglas, while in the South, it was Breckinridge and Bell battling it out. Lincoln didn't even appear on the ballot in many Southern states, and where he did, he was less than welcome. Still, despite only capturing 40% of the popular vote, Lincoln had a victory in the Electoral College, winning 180 electoral votes. He swept the North, minus New Jersey, which had to be that guy, and split with Douglas, and even grabbed California and Oregon on the Pacific coast. Douglas, ever the campaigner, took nearly 30% of the vote, but only managed to win Missouri's 12 electoral votes. Breckinridge, representing the South, got 18% of the vote, but had a decent haul of 72 electoral votes, capturing most of the Southern states, plus Delaware and Maryland. Bell, the Constitutional Union guy, snuck in with 12.6% of the vote and snagged 39 electoral votes by winning Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. However, this wasn't just a political race. It was the official, who's got the power, showdown, and it was clear that the South and the North were divided on nearly every front. Lincoln, despite his broad support in the North, didn't win a single Southern state, except for Virginia, where he managed to grab a whopping 1% of the vote. By the time Lincoln took office in March 1861, the Southern states had already begun to secede. And within a month of Lincoln's inauguration, the country was officially at war. And that, folks, is how the Civil War came to be. The 1860 election. The beginning of party drama. The 1860 election wasn't just about picking a president. It was like the season finale of American politics. In fact, it's often seen as the first of three critical elections in U.S. history, major political showdowns that shook up party loyalties for good. Now, some historians like to make things complicated and argue that the election of 1824 should actually take the title of first critical election, but most people agree that 1860 was the real game changer. After this election, the Democratic and Republican parties were firmly established as the two major players in the political arena. No more splinter parties or wildcards taking the stage. It was like the start of a new political era. From the 1870s to the 1890s, these two heavyweights were pretty much neck and neck, battling it out in federal elections. The only exception? The South, which pretty much declared itself Team Democrat, for the foreseeable future. Talk about loyalty. As for Congress, well, it was a pretty equal tug of war between the two parties. But when it came to the presidency, the Democrats didn't have much luck. They only grabbed the White House twice during the late 19th century, thanks to Grover Cleveland's two terms, 1885 to 89 and 1893 to 97. The rest of the time, it was mostly the Republicans calling the shots.